How do you get on with this situation when you bring out an album sort of every 2 years? And
Well, it was difficult because, like the last album, when that was finished, it was just a matter of doing the promotion, and then I was clear again to do another album. But I started writing the songs, and they took about 4 or 5 months really to get. Because what I wanted to do is make sure I had a big selection of songs to choose from. Because in the past the problem has been I've never just managed to grab the time to scrape together the songs for the album, and that's it. Whereas this time
Excuse me, Kate. Mum's just said there's something that she needs to communicate.
Some toast. I'm going to have some toast.
oh, okay. Do you want to bring it over?
I'm busy. Well, and I've been so busy promoting the album. I mean, every day there's something happening. And I've just got back from Europe. I only got back the day before yesterday, and I spent yesterday catching up on all the stuff I got behind me while I was in Europe. So,
What were you doing there?
TVs and a little bit of radio, but mainly TVs. And we did Italy and Germany.
Was that for the album?
Yes, it was indirectly for the album, because out there, the Dreaming, the single, is still happening. So
It's done better over there, is it?
well, it's only just starting to happen, so we're doing TVs to help it. And every show we did the Dreaming. So, it'd be interesting to see how it does. But it all helps the album, really.
Sure.
So I was into doing it from that point of view. It's great. It's just very busy, actually.
I saw the video for The Dreaming. They eventually did get it on TV.
Yeah.
Yeah, very up to scratch, should I say,
Liked it? Oh, good.
It was like it's similar to the stage set, the dancers, but it had the benefit of all the people in the background. And where was it shot?
We shot it in UX, which is a video studio in Wandsworth.
Oh, that was the studio?
Yeah. It was a very good set, wasn't it? Incredible set design.
Where do you get the guys from?
I actually found those set designers through the director I was using, through their production company.
Who did direct it?
It was Golden Dawn Productions, a guy called Paul Henry.
Yeah. And what's going to be the next single that you're working on?
Well, we've done the video for the next one, which is There Goes a Tenor.
Sorry?
There Goes a Tenor.
Now what's that about? Is it about robbery?
Yeah.
What, sort of pickpockets in the East End, etc.?
Yeah. It's about amateur robbers who have only done small things, and this is like quite a big robbery that they've been planning for months. And when it actually starts happening, they start freaking out. They're really scared, and they're so aware of the fact that something could go wrong that they're just freaked out and paranoid and want to go home.
Really? Is it based on any kind of film?
No, it's sort of... All the films I've seen with robberies in, the crooks have always been incredibly in control and calm. And I always thought that if I ever did a robbery, I'd be really scared, I'd be really worried. So I thought, I'm sure that's a much more human point of view.
Yeah. The thing was, I thought it might be based on a film. It was on telly over Christmas. It was about a guy that was blackmailed into doing a robbery. And, of course, he really was scared. And the further he got sort of involved in it, he had to carry it out.
Right.
But he was having the sleepless nights and stuff. And then,
how did he get blackmailed? Because he'd murdered someone.
He'd been in prison a long time.
Right.
And therefore, when the robbery took place, like the mafia bosses who were organising it knew they had a stool pigeon.
Wow.
And so they got him to do it.
Great. Yeah, it's a similar sort of thing, isn't it? 'Cause I'm sure like a lot of these young kids, when they actually get into a situation where it is, not just a little job, it must be really scary.
Yeah. What made you think about it? I mean, are you do you run into these East End types before? Or?
No, I think it was much more the thing of watching a lot of films, and I mean, things like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, there's lots of films where robberies take place, and yet they're glorifying it. They always make the robbery something very heroic and fun, risky and dangerous. But for me, it's something incredibly scary, something that has such a potential of going wrong that it's not worth the risk. And I don't think it's something that should be glorified at all. I think it's something that should be made very real, so that people realise that it's not worth the effort.
Yeah.
It's not something that's fun. It's something that's just not worth the effort. Because people end up in jail for bloody years.
And is that the video you were shooting in the train carriage on the way up to Manchester?
That was
or
the one.
practicing for it?
That was the one we were practicing for. Yes,
Really?
but only because we didn't have any time. Because that show came up at the last minute,
Right.
and we were planning to rehearse all that night. So instead of doing it in the studio, we did it in the back of the train like this. It's really
And how many of you were there, sort of, in that girl's van?
It was just the three of us. They cleared it out for us. It was really great of them, actually.
What,
They were
yourself?
sort of each station we stopped at, there'd be various guards who'd pull the window down and go, right then, because they're just checking us out. And it's great. They cleared all the post and chickens and pigs and all the things.
Really?
And they
Get
just,
some odd things, don't you?
so it was completely empty carriage. It was beautiful. The only thing was we could hardly hear the tape recorder because the noise was so bad.
Right.
So we were more or less having to sort of keep checking them. And it was very hard to stay stationary at 150 miles an hour.
And that kind of dance somehow can get incorporated to a film about a robbery.
Yeah.
That should be interesting.
See, one of the bits in the song is all about waiting, and how like the first time they're just waiting for something to go wrong, and the second time they're just like waiting for the guy to blow the safe up. Because when he blows it up, there's so much that could go wrong. And it's like a dance routine that's like based on waiting. And so it's like this sort of thing where it's like, just all these ideas of people waiting. And the rest of the dance is more acting out what the story says, really. It's not so much a dance at all.
Do you think this one's going to be more successful than the last one?
I don't know. I don't know what to think about singles anymore.
Was it your idea for it to be a single?
What, There Goes a Tenor? Yes, I think I was in full agreement with him. But I think I've reached a stage where, because the dreaming didn't work, we all felt, especially from an airplay point of view, that in order to get airplay, which you need for a single to work, that we should go for one that was more obvious. And there's no doubt that There Goes the Tenor is one of the more obvious songs.
Not that there are a lot on the album that are obvious.
No. So we're just going for this and see what happens.
I mean, it's quite a bold move to go into that kind of direction, particularly when you've been out of the limelight for a year or two. But
Yes.
how sensible do you think it is? I mean, it's easily the least commercial stuff you've ever done this album.
Yes.
At a time when perhaps you should have been doing the most.
Yes. You see, from my point of view, although I've been out of the limelight from the last album, all I was planning to do was make another album as quickly as I could. But since I wrote the songs, I realised that it was very different. And all the time I do very much want to change my album. And I do actually think that the direction I'm going in is away from the commercial, or the obvious commercial.
Sure.
But I think, from my point of view, it wasn't so much because I was out of the limelight that I had to do something more commercial. Because at that time, I wasn't actually out of the limelight. I was just starting my next album, and I thought it was only going to take me a couple of months. But before I know it, the whole thing has become much more involved. The songs are much more involved, and I know that it's going to take me at least 6 months to a year to get it the way I want. So by the time it's finished, I've been out of the public side for maybe, apart from Sat in Your Lap, of course,
Which
in
is good
fact
for a stopgap.
and in fact it got to number 11.
Yeah.
A lot of people forget about that, you see. They just forget that ever happened. So I've been completely out of the public side for 2 years.
Well, it's funny actually you should say something like that, because I mean, when that came out and all those drums, I thought, aha. This general thought like she's trying to cash in on the old adamant tribal drum sound.
Yeah. You see, again, that was very annoying because when I'd actually started getting that together, I mean, Adamant wasn't really happening as
Really?
such. So
Was Rolf Harris more of an influence even then?
I've
Things like
wanted,
Sunrise.
yes, I mean, I've wanted to work with Rolf for like 2 or 3 years because when I did the last album, I had an idea for doing a song all about Australia, which would have didgeridoos and all this sort
Really?
of thing.
What,
But-
for Never Forever?
Yes, but I just didn't have the time to actually sit down and write the song. And the same with Houdini. I had lots of ideas about writing the song for Houdini, but I just didn't have the time to do it because I was actually making that album. And already for that album, I'd managed to, because at that time I hadn't written Army Dreamers yet, but I knew I wanted to write a song about that. And it was during the album that I wrote that song.
What, the false romanticism of the military sort of thing? Or?
But the Army Dreamers thing, yeah, the whole thing of kids getting caught up in it, yeah. And it was only really because I just managed to pull the song together in time that got on the last album.
Right.
But I really wanted to make that song a few years ago, but I'm sure if I had it wouldn't have sounded anything like it did on this album, so I'm glad that it waited, really. But I think a lot of the ideas for the stuff on this album have in fact been things I've wanted to do for years, but just haven't been ready for it or haven't had the time. Because the whole tribal and ethnic thing has really been happening within my family because of my brother Paddy for 10 years. And I mean, he's the one who's been gradually pulling me that way. I mean, even on the first album, there were a lot of unusual instruments hidden amongst the sort of arrangements, which were very much speaking from my side of things and my brother's. And I think gradually, each time I've done an album, I've got more control and therefore been able to portray a lot more of what I really mean to get across.
It's a wild track, that Houdini. It certainly gets a bit manic.
Great.
What's it about?
It's all about Houdini from Mrs. Houdini's point of view.
Sorry?
Mrs. Houdini.
The Houdini, the escape artist?
That's right, he was married.
Right.
And his wife was actually quite involved with his whole life and his work. And she used to help him a lot with the tricks. And one of the things, which is what the album covers about, is before he went off into his tank, where he was all tied up and everything, she'd give him a parting kiss. And as she kissed him, she'd pass him a tiny little key, which he then later used when he was in water to
unlock all the chains.
Unlock the chains. And as soon as I heard that imagery, I just thought it was so beautiful and so extraordinary. And if you tie that in with the whole side of his life, where he was completely obsessed with exposing mediums as frauds. I don't know if you know anything about
No.
that. This was another side of him. His mother died, and he was really, really close to her, like really close. And when she died, he needed desperately to try and communicate with her through media. And he just came across all these people who were basically making money out of the art of pretending to speak to the dead. And when he realised all these people were just, basically ruining people's lives just to make some money, he decided to, in a very positive way, show that they were frauds and tricksters. So he spent years of his life dedicating time to finding any medium who said that they were really authentic and proving that they were completely false. So he spent years of his life doing this and ruining people's careers and getting an awful lot of spiritualists at the time. Before he died, he said to his wife that I'm going to die before you, and when I do, I'm going to try everything I can to try and come back through a real medium. And there'll be one way that you'll know it's me, because all these tricksters and are going to jump on the wagon and say that I've come through. But I'm going to use words that only you and I know. It's a code, so you'll know that it's me and no one else. So they made this code together, and when he died, she went round all the seances waiting for him to come through. And it's extraordinary, really, because the thing happened on 3 levels, because apparently when he first got his stage acts together, he was more into magic and the same kind of fraud. And he used to do things where he would pretend he was contacting the dead, and he would tell the audiences messages from their dead people, and it was all a trick. And then it happened to him through his mother, where they were all tricking him because he wanted to contact his mother. And then exactly the same thing happened to his wife after his death, when they were all trying to trick her that he had come through. And it's just so extraordinary, that really that whole link with him escaping chains and things, and then trying to escape death, and this weird sort of parallel of contact and frauds. It's just an incredibly extraordinary man and story.
How did you get into all this?
Just heard about it. I don't even remember how I first heard about the big thing of exposing mediums. I mean, that was what started it, because it was such a strange story, the fact that he should be so obsessed with proving that they weren't real. And then I started hearing about how his wife was involved, because I didn't even know that he was married. And as soon as there was like an emotional contact, the fact that there was some woman who was really in love with him, who stuck with him through it all, it became a perfect angle to write then, really. especially when you thought about that even when he was dead, she spent all her time trying to be with him.
The credits on the album, there's two mentioned. There's Gordon Farrell. Who's that?
He was my singing teacher.
Really?
Yeah. Years ago, I used to go every week for his lessons, and really it was great because he gave me loads of confidence in singing, which is what I needed more than anything. And I just used to go to him half an hour a week, and by the end of the year, I felt a lot more, really a lot more confident in myself as a singer. Worked wonders. And on Houdini, I don't know if you noticed at the end, but there are these and that's him.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. It's great.
And so you gave him a mention from that point of view.
Yeah, you sang on it.
And what's the Rosabelle Believe bit?
Ah. Well, that's actually the words that were the code between him and her.
Between Houdini and his wife?
Yeah. And they were the words that proved to her that it was him and only him.
And why did you put Del Palmer's name next to that?
Because he was the one who actually pretended to be him in the song. The idea in the song was that it was the voice of Houdini, perhaps coming from the other side, when in fact it was Del on the telephone.
Oh, I see. Del played that part. He played that sort of role.
It was on the end of the telephone. It's good.
But Del's also the bass player on quite a few of the tracks.
Yes, he is, yeah.
Because the funny thing is, you got Jimmy Bain, right? Who was in a mad sort of, he was in Rainbow, then he's in Wild Horses.
Wild Horses.
He seems to play on all the crazier tracks.
I think what I enjoyed again about this album, because each track has got a very different mood, really, or groups of tracks have got different moods.
Yeah.
And it was nice to use people almost specifically for what they were very good at. And I mean, I always think of Jimmy as being a really simple rock and roll bass player, which doesn't mean to be detrimental, because I think it's great actually. Because what those songs needed that he was on was a very simple, very driving bass that was just going to keep the whole thing going without being distracting or too full. And Jimmy was just right for that, really. So he worked on the three tracks that I would definitely say were the rockiest, were the most up-tempo, perhaps the most aggressive.
And did that have something to do with the fact that he'd with Wild Horses had a contract with EMI and he was still under...
See, I didn't even know he was with EMI.
Really?
I knew he was with Wild Horses, and I met him when I just bumped into Bill Linnott in a recording
really? When was
session.
that?
This is at the Townhouse, and I was there to just look over the studio because that's where I wanted to work. And Phil was actually going to give me a weekend of his time that he wouldn't be using. So I just went in to check out with him that it would be okay. And he was doing a really far-out vocal at the time.
Phil was?
Yeah, it was really beautiful.
What, was this for his solo album or...?
No, I think it was Thin Lizzy because the band were there with him. And Jimmy just happened to be there, and I just sat next to him, and we were both going, oh, great voice, and I just happened to hear that he'd been involved in a couple of other things that I liked, so it was quite a coincidence. And it seemed just sort of right, really, to use him for the rockier tracks. But like, there's a couple of other tracks, like Pull Out the Pin. I really wanted a double bass, so I had to get a double bass player, and I wanted it to be quite sort of funky without being flippant or sort of jazz rock, you know what I mean? And I knew Danny Thompson from having seen him work with John Martin, and I really liked it because like John's voice and his bass, it was really very free. And I found it very expressionful, not sort of technical, very emotional double bass player. So I thought he'd be perfect for that track. And that happened with quite a few musicians, where although I've got more or less a set band, there's really quite a few tracks where perhaps guest people come in for this or that reason. And I suppose in a lot of ways it worried me at the start because of perhaps lack of continuity But then because the songs were so different from each other, I'm glad. I mean, I'm glad now that that's the way it worked. But I did have some worries at the time because I was using, maybe 3 or 4 different people.
Right.
But I'm actually quite pleased with the way it came out.
Because you've not really got a band as such anymore, have you?
No, that's actually quite a depressing thought.
Well, not really.
Well, no, I suppose not, because it leaves me nice and open.
I mean, you've seen what Kevin Rowland's doing with Midnight Runners?
No.
Well, he's got a central nucleus of about 3, right, and stage show incorporates about 11.
Right.
And he can't keep it up with people on wages, so he calls them up when he wants them.
Right, so he just keeps the 3.
And I think that's really how rock's going to move. And the people that aren't working with him, when they're not working with him, they've got a reputation from him to go on and do session work.
Yes, that's right. You see, I think I'm a bit like that in that, right from the start, I've definitely carried 2 people with me all the way. Well, 3, I suppose. Like Tad has always been involved.
He's your brother, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
Is he a guitarist?
Well,
or accordion?
No, he plays like a lot of different instruments. And again, he really is the one who's allowed me to use unusual instruments because he happens to be able to play them. So it's great because Ted's got this real knack of being able to pick up nearly any instrument that's unusual and just have a feel for it.
Was he some kind of influence behind the didgeridoo, for example?
Yes, I mean, I do think Ted actually started the initial interest in me in unusual ethnic instruments because, for years he's been interested in them and building them and making them. Like he'll find an instrument that hasn't been made for hundreds of years and he'll build one. So, that is very stimulating.
How old is Pad? Is he younger or older than you?
He's a bit older than me, yes, but I think he definitely has been a strong stimulus in that area, especially with the instruments, because he's really brought to my notice a lot of instruments that I've never heard of before, but he makes them familiar to me. I get to know the sound of them, and then maybe one day when I'm writing a song, I think, oh yeah, that sound that Ted had. It'd be great in there.
Are you doing some practicing?
We're working 4 things, but we're not actually together as a unit. But the nice thing about Dan and Brian is that we've been together since like the rock little band we had in the pubs, which was 5 years ago.
So, which one was that?
The Katie Bush band, which was when we were going around the pubs.
And you've been with which one of the guys?
With Brian Barr and Del Palmer. They've both been with me ever since. They've maybe never played on all the albums, but they've been on each album for 2 or 3 tracks, and they were on the tour. And it's lovely because I feel that I would still want to use them in the future, which is great because in a way they are my travelling nucleus, just those 3. But I would love to have a band, like a secure band, because I think that's a very good feeling. And even though you have a lot of personality problems, at least you're all together and they learn what you want eventually, you hope. So eventually it must become easier to communicate with them.
So Del's been with you since post Gilmore by EMI contract days kind of thing?
Yes, and so has Brian, because before I actually started recording it, in the years when EMI was just sort of not doing anything and I was more or less just doing things so that my time would be full, we got a little 3-piece band together.
During your when they signed you?
Before the album was made, but I'd already signed.
Since they signed it when you were about 15, 16
yes,
or something?
Yes, that's right, I was about 18. And it was just for the few months before I started my first album. And that was when we got this band together. And I think it formed, very strong links between us all. And I think they're great. I would still love to work with them. Because I think what's nice about them is they're I would call them much more emotional players than technical players. Not that they're in any way technically bad.
It's like Dave Gilmore himself, actually.
Yes, I would say so too. Because I think Dave's a fantastic guitarist because he doesn't go for these blinding arpeggios. It's really emotional. It's lovely and simple. I think that's what music is really about. I think technique has become a big distraction.
Oh, I think everybody's realising that now, actually.
Yes, I think
because the emotion, the song, the tune. I don't know. I think it's something to do with to be honest, the sort of social economic climate.
Yes.
When it comes down to it, real relationships become more important.
Yes.
Sort of vis-a-vis the difficulties of the outside world. In other words, everybody's got to put their cards on the table.
Yes, I would agree with you. But I think also what that seems to be doing is making people grab more as well. So although you're getting people being more emotionally open, I think you're also getting people that are really, they're just grabbing. They're really getting into ripping people off in a bigger way, I suppose. I think you've got the two things.
So where's the tie-up as far as you're concerned?
Where's the
tie-up? You've got to be more careful yourself.
Yes, I think everyone has to be more careful, which perhaps in itself makes people realise they're few good friends more. I mean, I think generally everyone is being much more wary and careful and insular. And yet at the same time I think there's a much bigger need in people to communicate and share. So there's like an awful conflict between people. And I think there's so many big contradictions with the levels that we're all living on now. Where no one has any money and no job, and it doesn't really matter. But at the same time, the whole of society is built on money, which you can only get from jobs. So it's becoming a big catch-22 situation for so many people. Because I think a lot of people are seeing now that it's not detrimental to not have a job. It's one of the facts of this society.
1 in 7 of the population, etc.
Yes, and it's not something that should make you feel insecure or inferior, because it's just the way it is. But at the same time, they can't even relax in that situation because they've got to have money to survive. I mean, it just seems, and all the sort of things that are being created for leisure time are so expensive that most people can't afford them. So it's just so contradictory, isn't it? Really, I think it's terribly hard for people.
So, do you see that there being any kind of solution?
I think perhaps
in regards to the music and stuff,
Well, I think the great thing about music is that whenever people come into hard times, music always flourishes. During the wars and everything, music has always had a big flourish, because I think when people do get unhappy and lost, music is one of the things they turn to, because it brings them great comfort. And so I think in many ways there's a great potential for music to grow and everything. It's much more the people and people connected to society that are going to suffer. But I don't think there is a solution for them other than a very big shock to the system, where we either change our monetary system around and forget about that.
How do you mean?
I don't know. One suggestion is perhaps to go back to a bartering situation where you swap things that you have for other things that you want, because you don't have money. So you swap and barter, and people grow things and make things so that you have something in exchange for the things you want. But I can't see any solution other than something like that, because of the whole way our system is built up. It's so dependent on money, and yet there is not enough money for it.
You're dealing with quite a few sort of unusual themes at the moment. On the album, there's a fairly violent kind of imagery. Like pull out the pin. Presumably refers to a hand grenade.
Yeah, that's right.
What sort of brings you on to that?
Well, I think I've always been into that sort of imagery, really. I think it's just that that's because of the surface suggestions of what the music is about. People don't realise that they're actually about what they're about, you see what I mean? And I think in a way, the songs on this album are much more obvious what they really are. I think on a lot of the other albums there have been very similar themes, it's just they've been much less obvious about that.
Well, Wedding List, for example, was a violent song.
Yes, it was,
A song about revenge.
Yes, and I actually think Breathing was a very violent song too, just because it was so negative. I mean, there's a lot of just awful imagery about it. It's really terrible, it's so negative, without hope at all. And yet, people they seem to treat it on quite a normal level.
How is Breathing negative? That never occurred to me, how that's violent.
I think some of the imagery in it it's more or less saying that this baby that's being born, that it's a baby that perhaps has had several lives before, and is about to be destroyed inside its mother, because it's living off its mother, and its mother will die, and it will die even before it sees the day of life. I mean, I think that's really negative.
You are. So you're into reincarnation a bit, aren't you?
Yes, I think so. I love the idea of a person during one lifetime actually having 3 or 4 lives.
Within the same lifetime.
Yeah, you see, I feel that reincarnation is much just a continuation of that. Because if you look at yourself or maybe other people, you can see little circles that maybe they've hit their, say they're 50 or 60, but these little circles that occurred each time, maybe in each phase of their life. You know, where they get into a rut and come round to a very similar relationship to one they had years ago, and it ends up in exactly the same way. They start again, exactly the same thing happens, and they end up where they are again. And yet some people maybe make that little complete circle and then break right away. And really, I mean, for myself, if I look at my life, in a way I've had almost 2 lives, because the first part of my life was so different from the second part.
Which part?
Second stage.
Staying at home all day, composing.
Yes, I would say from my life up until 16, and then from 17 up until now, I've been in 2 completely different stages. I mean, I changed my Christian name, became a vegetarian, left school, got
Really?
into dance.
What was your Christian name?
Well, just things like I used to be called Kathy, and I became Kate, and that was a very different stage for me. And I think people,
Why would Kate be more sort of time with the vegetarian thing and
I
stuff?
don't know, but it actually created.
Did you lose lots of weight or something?
No, I didn't. I think just becoming called that name gave me a chance to break away from the person I'd been before. I mean, there's no doubt that when people change their names, they actually do change.